The Liqui-Grow educational events are valuable to us because it allows us as maybe senior members or owners of the business to go in and get a quick review, a refresher of those things that we have used over the years, but it's time to get brushed up on those topics. So it's a great refresher for those of us and as that have been here for a couple years. And it's also the same for our new employees as they come into the operation. We want them to understand the reasons that we're doing the dribble band applications, the reasons that we're out here with Liqui-Grow's equipment, because it's ease of mind for us, and it really helps our younger employees understand the other aspects of the agronomics that we need.
I feel the educational events that Liqui-Grow provides are different than maybe what else is going on out in the market. Liqui-Grow's approach to the virtual opportunities and in the array of different topics has appealed to me, and it's bringing some value to my operation this winter in particular.
They usually bring cutting edge knowledge to my operation that I can use to directly impact either yields and ultimately the gross profit per acre. Really, it's the people. Flat out, it's the people that move my business forward because they are the expertise that I need to be a better farmer.
Lead Academy.
Liqui-Grow.
Excellence.
And agronomy development.
Good morning. Welcome to Liqui-Grow Lead Academy. Today we are hosting a webinar with Dr. Jake Vossenkemper, who is the agronomy director at Liqui-Grow, and Dr. Peter Scharf, a plant scientist at the University of Missouri. They will be discussing the wet weather that occurred in April and May and what effect, if any, it had on nitrogen loss. They will also discuss options for rescuing and preserving yields in nitrogen deficient corn. We hope you enjoy this exciting presentation. As always, you can submit questions at any point throughout the webinar in the chat below, or you can email them to questions@liqui-grow.com. And with that, we will start the presentation and we will see you after for Q&A.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our agronomy lead session this morning. Today, our guest speaker is Dr. Peter Scharf. Dr. Scharf is a professor of plant sciences at the University of Missouri, and he's also the founder of a company called NVision Ag. So, believe it or not, we are here to talk about saturated soils and the potential for N-loss in 2021. Now, many of you in southern Wisconsin, and frankly, most of northern Iowa, would not believe that we've had excessive rain this spring in southern Iowa and parts of northwest Illinois, but we have. And we're here to talk a little bit about, what can be done if you have had excessive in-loss conditions. How can we predict the amount of in-loss we may have had, and how can we fix it? So Dr. Scharf, just how much rain do you typically have to have in the spring season, the beginning of the summer, for in-loss to become a major concern?
Well, I have a couple simple rules of thumb, and they're not that good because the amount that it takes depends on how much you had over the winter and what kind of soil you got and what your nitrogen management program is, when you put it on and in what form. But the simple rules of thumb for me are, if you get 16 inches of rain April through June, you're going to see a lot of yellow corn in that area. And in the more poorly drained soils, even if April's dry, if you get a lot in May and June, it doesn't have to be 16 inches. 10, 12 inches in May and June will often do the same thing in an area with poorly drained soils. And that's just, when I see that on the map, I see yellow corn in the field.
Yeah, we happen to be at our Mount Pleasant, Iowa Liqui-Grow location today, and looking at some of your in-loss maps, I think we've had roughly about 15 inches of rain since April 1st.
Right.
And we've got a little bit of yellow corn behind us, and this corn's pretty early, so I suspect these areas may grow before it's all over with.
Right, well, and it depends on what happens from here on out. I mean, on a soil that'll move water through it, it's not only that it's just out the bottom, it's moved down, and it'll move down farther if we get more rain. And if it's a soil where it doesn't move down, when it's warm and it's ponded, that's when you lose it fast up into the air. And so, we got another 2-3 weeks before the final scorecard's going to be in. So yes, if nothing else happens, this could grow, but it's not going to cover the whole field.
Sure,
but if we get another couple big rains, it could be a whole lot bigger in the field. And so we're waiting to see what happens there, but we also, we need to have our finger on what's happening now.
So Dr. Scharf, let's assume that we have had enough spring and early summer precipitation this year to really cause significant in-loss. Okay, let's assume that's the case. Okay. Can you expound a little bit on some different methods that we've used over time to actually detect in-loss and go about fixing it practically?
Sure, thanks Jake. That's a great question, and it's one that I've spent 30 years working on, 35 really. And what I've come to is color and satellite images, and the reason is scale. I mean, everything in crop agriculture is about scale, animal agriculture too, but how many acres can you do in a day? And I can look at 100 fields in a satellite image. In 1 hour, I can mark all 100 of yes, no, or maybe on whether they need nitrogen. How much soil sampling could you get done in that much time? And how good would that sample be? And how long do you have to wait for it? All those questions mean that it is very hard to scale soil sampling or tissue sampling, and the accuracy is also lower, and the spatial resolution of what's happening in different parts of the field is lower. And for those reasons, I've given up on those approaches, because I can look from the air and I can see boom, 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 and do a lot of acres in a day.
Yeah, and you're right. In ag retail and farmers, this is a very limited window, and we're busy doing all kinds of field operations. So scalability is really important in my opinion.
And it's not only what the farmers can and can't do. I mean, if they've got a consultant, how many fields can the consultant do in a day? Even though that whole day is dedicated to helping with nitrogen decisions, it's still going to be a lot less fields in a day with a soil sample or a tissue sample than by looking from the air with something that you can get yesterday and look at it and just go boom, boom, boom. Now you need to really analyze it to make a good decision, but just visually you can see what's going on in a very short time.
Yeah, not to mention cost. If we do try to scale soil sampling, that can get costly.
It sure can. You can spend a lot of money, and then you got to keep track of it all. Which answer went with which field and who has to get it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, Dr. Scharf, we talked a little bit about some of the pitfalls of soil sampling. What about nitrogen modeling, right? There's lots of entities that are offering nitrogen models that, the claims are that, they can predict future nitrogen requirement or in-loss, and the combination of the two really to meet the crop's needs. What are your thoughts about those versus sensing the crop?
Well, I think, honestly, the scale problem is still there. If you don't have all that information for that field entered in January, and the time comes and you think you might have lost some nitrogen and it's June, and it takes a half an hour to enter the field information in that model, you can't do that. You can't scale it now. Now, if you can get all your customers to do it in January, it's still a lot of work, but then you can scale it later. So that's
January's R&R time, though.
Right. Who wants to give up on that?
Right.
So it's a lot of work to get everything in there. Whereas, I mean, with the images, I mean, what we require in NVision Ag is just a boundary file, and we say, okay, we know where to look, we get the picture, and that's all you have to input. It's like takes a minute. So I think that the scale of how much of it you can get done is really an important thing. And then the other thing is, how good are they? How accurate are they? The color of the corn is going to tell you when it doesn't have enough nitrogen. And for the other things to be right, there's like a million equations, and if 17 of them are wrong, you're going to get the wrong answer. And so it may be where the water's going in the soil. They may have that wrong. The soil data that they're basing it all on is not very detailed and not very accurate to really say what's happening to the water and the nitrogen. Now, I'm not saying they're not better than, I think I would rather do that than do a soil sample because of both scaling and accuracy, but I still think, they have some limitations that are never going to be completely overcome.
Yeah, and this is simple, but the way I look at it, the crop will tell you when and where it's in deficient.
Right. Yeah. It's not shy.
Yeah. I've been in a lot of fields that have suffered from saturated soils and subsequent in-loss, and oftentimes, that corn can look pretty sick and pretty tough, right? So, I mean, how much yield loss can we really expect in those areas? And more importantly, can that crop really recover? Oftentimes a farmer's like, Jake, I can't imagine spending more money on this crop. It's done. Is that the case? Should they just write it off, or can it respond to more nitrogen?
Well, in 2015, which was our last really bad year for a big wet area across the Midwest, I set out in search of corn that was so bad that it wasn't worth rescuing, and I failed. The 4 worst fields we looked at were tasseling, 50% tasseled on average. They were shoulder high, they were completely pale yellow, and we still made an average of 45 bushel response to extra nitrogen on them. And that was more than the fields that didn't look as bad. I still am sticking with the rule that the worse it looks, the more you need to do it, and the more it's going to respond. Now, it's not always that the yellowest areas are going to catch up with the rest of the field, because there's 2 things that go wrong when it's standing in water. One is it loses nitrogen, and the other is that the roots get permanently damaged or held back. The oxygen deprivation that they undergo while it's too wet, they may never completely recover from that. It's how the roots grow, but I think it's also some physiological switch that happens, that it's less aggressive about how it grows because of that early season experience. But it's always the place where you're going to make the most money on nitrogen, even if it doesn't catch the rest of the field.
Yeah, and I would support your comments. I mean, I've done some rescue nitrogen trials with some farmers, on farm as well as small plots, and when there's leaf area there, you can turn it green pretty quick. I mean, so if there's leaf area there, I think you'd be surprised. I think farmers would be surprised just how well it can do.
And even sometimes with nitrogen stress, the leaves will be thinner than the other parts of the field where it's got enough nitrogen, but it's still a huge difference that a thin yellow leaf versus a thin dark green leaf.
Sure.
And so it catches sunlight. That's its job. And when it's a light color, it's not catching that sunlight. It's bouncing it back to outer space. You want to catch it. And so it's not, it doesn't have to be that it's all perfect. It has to be that that plant got help when it needed it.
So Dr. Scharf, now that we know that green leaf color can clearly be a method to predict the need for nitrogen, how has NVision Ag and how have you developed a solution to that problem?
Well, we didn't just pull it out of a hat. We did a lot of research, and we did a lot of experiments where we measured what rate made the most money and what color it was at different stages. We also did a whole lot of fields where there was nitrogen loss, and we measured the color, compared it to yield maps, and developed what's the equation that mathematically ties the color of the leaf to the amount of nitrogen that you need, or the number of bushels that you're going to lose if you don't do anything, which are the 2 things you really need to know. And so we developed a translation system, is basically what it comes down to, and it has to be based on research. It can't be based on what somebody thinks it would be. And that's the key to where we've gone with this. We have 5 issued patents. The University of Missouri has 5 issued patents, and at NVision Ag we license those 5 patents exclusively. And so that research informs how we make that decision, how we tell you the right answer.
Excellent, excellent. The first question I get from a farmer is going to be, does NVision Ag work? Can it really fix their problems? Okay. The second question I'm going to get is, what does it cost? So what does the NVision Ag prescriptions and the system cost a farmer on a per acre basis?
To start with, if you know you're going to get a prescription, it's $2.50. 50 cents for the image. If you're using the image to make a decision, you can just buy the image, look at it, and if you see all green, no problem, then you're done. You've only spent 50 cents an acre. If you want to have some help of yes or no, the yield loss map will do that. It'll tell you how many total bushels, how many total dollars you're going to lose in that field, and that's $2. But if you know you're going to do nitrogen, you don't need to do that. You can get a prescription for $2, but it's basically $2.50 an acre for the first acre, and then the price goes down with volume. You can get down to $1.50 if once you hit a pretty high number of acres. So for an organization like Liqui-Grow, you could have one account and get up to a pretty high number of acres and drop that price.
Okay. Excellent.
But $2.50 an acre with what's corn now?
Well, it's hovering around $6 last time I checked.
Right. So you don't even need a half a bushel.
Right.
To make the cost of NVision Ag back. And if your corn needs nitrogen, you're probably talking field averages of 20, 30, 35, 40 bushels. And I didn't see any that bad on the way here, but I saw tons of 40 and 50 bushel fields in 2015. And I probably saw a bunch of 10 to 20 bushel fields on the drive here today.
Excellent, thank you. So Dr. Scharf, if a retail salesman of ours or a farmer is interested in this solution, how do they go about getting access to your program?
Well, the easiest thing is just go home and sit on your computer or phone and do it. You go to NVisionAg.com and you'll be able to see that, but it's just the company name.com, and you set up an account like any other account online. It takes 5 minutes to put in your username and your password and create an account, and then you put in a boundary file, and we get an image usually within 24 hours that's very recent of that field, and then you can just click to get a yield loss map or click to get a nitrogen rate prescription file, and those are both instantaneous. So it's a couple of minutes investment to get that, and you don't need any help. You can do it on your own. Now, if you've got people at Liqui-Grow that become kind of like the person who's familiar with it, it might make it some farmers who are a little hesitant to do it on their own could do it through that person, but pretty much anyone can do it with very little time and very little effort.
All right, Dr. Scharf, a couple last questions here. So,
Okay.
some more of my personal experience when I'm walking some of these fields that have had excessive N loss and presumably yield loss from nitrogen loss. Oftentimes they're just getting ready to tassel or maybe even to brown silk, right? And the concern from the farmer is, can you really save this crop, at tasseling or a little after? They're very hesitant to spend money on a crop that, in their mind is done. What's your thoughts about that on timing?
Well, if it really needs it, it's not too late. You may not get as much at tassel as you would have gotten a week and a half or 2 weeks earlier, but you can still get a lot. The biggest response I've ever had at tassel was 80 bushels.
Wow.
And so
that's a lot.
That's a lot. So it's not time to give up. When is it time to give up? I haven't done the research far enough, and I know of 2 studies where they've done it. And what I tell people based on very limited information is 2 weeks. After it tassels, you got 2 weeks, and then you should consider pulling the plug if you don't have it done by then. But in 2 weeks, you should be able to get the whole thing done.
Right.
If unless you're really busy doing something else, it won't take that long.
Right.
So I think people who are determined to get it done will get it done before that window closes.
Last question for the day. So, I get called on lots of service calls. I get called out to look at a lot of problems. It's rare that I don't think I've ever been asked by a farmer or a retail salesman to come look at my beautiful field, right? There's usually something wrong.
Yeah, it's
Yep.
tough situation.
That's right. And if I hear that it's yellow streaks, I immediately think sulfur or nitrogen. That's what I think before I get there, right? And so usually it's one of the two. And in a lot of cases, we end up seeing yellow streaks in fields, and typically, that's associated with urea applications in tall standing corn. What are some of your experiences? What can some of the problems be with urea applications in tall standing corn?
Well, it depends on how tall it is. But if it's tall enough that that as it leaves the spinner blades, it hits in the leaf, then you're going to have a very poor pattern. Not going to go very far. And if I had corn like that, and that was the only machine I had to go through it, I'd do it, but I'd narrow up my pattern quite a bit because I know I'm not going to be able to throw it very far. I've seen plenty of fields from the air that I later learned it was urea, and it was not put on late, it was put on early, but it just was an uneven application. So even when there's nothing in the way, sometimes those spinners are not set right and they give poor spread patterns. And there is some leaf burn associated with them, and it'll really be, you'll get a white stripe right along the edge of the leaf that's maybe only a millimeter thick, and that shows that some urea got on there and it goes out to the edge of the leaf and burns it a little. It's not going to cost you too much yield, but it can look a little ugly. Yep. But I think that one of the beauties of fixing the problem with liquid is you're going to have a boom, and you can just keep going through it no matter how tall it is and drop it down in between, and so you've got many extra weeks compared to what you can do with a dry machine.
Yeah, so I mean my observations would support that. In general, spread patterns can be a problem with dry fertilizer, including urea, right? But I particularly noticed it when we try to spread urea in taller corn, right? Because that continues to funnel it in a concentrated area. So, I would urge farmers, if you have another option when it comes to rescuing corn with a solution like NVision Ag, urea in tall corn with a ground machine is probably not the best bet.
And it also, once it gets this tall, you're starting to get close to where it's going to hit it as it leaves the spinner. Even if it doesn't hit it when it leaves the spinner, it's going to hit it out at the edge of the pattern, and that's going to stop it and narrow that pattern. But I think this is also a good time to bring up that liquid is much more even in its application, but doing variable rate with liquid can be difficult and frustrating. And so what I recommend to people is if you've just got orifices, which is what most people have, set your top and bottom rates, which is very easy to do in NVision Ag. You just put in a number for your lowest rate, you put in a number for your highest rate, make it so that your rate at your good pressure that you want to run at is halfway in between those, and then just make it sure that the bottom and the top are no more than a factor of 2 apart from each other, or else there's some special equipment that lets the size of the hole get bigger and smaller with pressure, and just look into that, because that's a good way to do it. But don't go out there and think you can go from 0 to 50 gallons and then it doesn't work, because there are engineering types of obstacles there, but they can be overcome. And it's a great way to do it.
Yep, absolutely. You can design anything you want sitting in the office, but it's got to work with the machinery in the field. That's a great point. Well, Dr. Scharf, we really appreciate you making the drive up from Columbia, Missouri this morning to have this conversation with us. And, hopefully it quits raining, right? In these areas.
Not for too long.
Yeah, hopefully it rains a little bit often, and we get nice precipitation events for our northern geographies that are really suffering from a drought right now. But hopefully we get enough that the ground can handle and we don't have a lot more in loss.
Right.
But if we do, I truly recommend our customers and our retail salespeople to look into NVision Ag. Personally, this is the best solution to this problem that I've seen to date. So really encourage you to check it out. And thank you, Dr. Scharf.
Thanks. Really appreciate inviting me up. And not only was it a great time and a chance to connect to some of your customers, but I love driving around and seeing what's going on. So I got a bunch of windshield time to see what is going on in my area. And thanks anyone who's listening, because you're what makes this worth it.
Lead Academy.
Liqui-Grow
Excellence.
and agronomy development.
Okay, thank you for joining us and sticking with us through to the Q&A. As I stated earlier, we have Dr. Jake Vossenkemper from Liqui-Grow with us. We also have Dr. Peter Scharf, a plant scientist at the University of Missouri. And they are the gentlemen that you saw in the presentation, and they are both here today to field questions from our viewing audience. Remember, at any time you can put questions in the chat. I will be watching the YouTube chat, and you can also email them to questions@liqui-grow.com. Good morning, guys. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to get started here with a question. The first one that I have is, at what stage can we start getting imagery that tells us if the corn crop is going to be nitrogen deficient? In other words, when can we typically get started side dressing using your nitrogen recommendation system? And I believe that's directed to you, Dr. Scharf.
Thank you, Lisa. The answer depends on the technology that you're using for the imagery, but what we use dominantly is satellites, and we use that because our turnaround is real fast, and there's a direct pipeline. And with those, you cannot see individual plants. So really, it comes down to, when are you seeing mostly plant and not too much soil? And my approximate rule is when it's hip high. So when the corn's hip high, your satellite image is going to do a good job of telling you what the color of the plant is and whether you have a nitrogen issue or not and how big it is. We can go earlier than that, but it requires higher resolution where you can see individual plants. And there are some airplane-based images that are that good. And we've done quite a few drone images, and we can start when the corn is knee high or even a little smaller. But getting the drone images is a real chore, and it's hard to scale. If you're trying to do 1,000 fields that way, it's hard to do, but it can be done, and we can look at the individual plant and when it's smaller and still do a pretty good job.
Okay, great. Thank you. I have another question for you. My Liqui-Grow salesman has been telling me for years that I need to take nitrate samples, and that will tell us how much nitrogen we need to side dress. Does soil sampling for nitrate not work now?
Well, it didn't get better and it didn't get worse. It works the same as it always did, which was a little better than just guessing, but not a lot. I was part of a 7-state, 66 field study where we had like 13 different kinds of soil samples, and one of them was the side dress soil test or the late spring nitrate test, which I looked at some of those with Greg at Mount Pleasant when we did the video. So you guys use them. That was about 16% accurate at predicting the rate that was going to make the most money. And color in the same experiments was about 60%, which is still not 100%, but is a lot better. It's going to get you closer. So 16% in the right direction was still a positive for the soil tests, but they're not as accurate and they're slow. And I wouldn't say don't do them. I just say we have a better alternative.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Another question I have here is precision ag tools are great, but I have learned that they take too much time. We just don't have extra of that during the busy season. Is the NVision Ag recommendation system going to address this problem?
It's our number one priority to make it easy for the user and fast for the user. And so, because we understand that that's the constraint that people are operating under in this condition. It's June, you've got beans to spray. If you're a person who does hay, you may have that going on. And if you normally side dress, you've got that going on. And if you don't side dress, suddenly that's added onto your plate. And messing around is not something you have time for. It has to be simple. And really, you probably need to know how to do it ahead of time. But it's so easy with NVision Ag. You're just putting in a field boundary. And, it can take a couple minutes to make one. You can make one in our system. And it can take several minutes. And it's better if you have them already canned. And probably lots of the farmers that you work with do have them somewhere. They may not know where they are, but but they have them. And so it's just a question of, kind of organizing ahead of time. Okay, here's where they all are, and I can pop them into NVision Ag if I need them. And it's just 1 minute to put a boundary in, and then probably within 24 hours, you're going to have an answer of how many bushels you're looking at losing if you don't do anything, or else the other answer is how much do I need to put where, and a file that goes into your applicator and runs it.
So I have a follow-up question for that, because you mentioned when you were answering about you need to know how to do it beforehand. What is the typical learning curve on something like this?
Well, the only thing that's tricky is the part about knowing where your boundary files are for the fields you want to do. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I would say that, somebody who's working with somebody who knows how to do that, and the answer, which might be their Liqui-Grow person, it might be some other industry person, it might be a YouTube video, but once you know where those are, you can probably learn it in 5 minutes from someone who really understands it. Of boom, 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 here's where they are, and when you need them, just grab them. So it's not much unless you're trying to do it by yourself and you don't know. And computers are like that. They're easy if you know the answer. So find someone who knows the answer of how to find your boundary files if you don't already know that, and do that in January or August. But once you know how to find them, it's a 1 minute process to put in a field. And at some point, we're going to have a process where you can say, I'm putting in these 30 fields all together in one operation. And, I took 3 minutes and I put 30 fields in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. I do have a question that just came in through the email. Are there different models for different soil types based on the coloring on the plant that will tell you how much nitrogen you need to add using this system?
The answer is no, we don't distinguish based on soil types. Our premise is that no matter what the soil type, if the nitrogen is lost, the color of the plant is going to reflect that, and it's going to reflect how much was lost, and different soil types will lose it differently, and they'll lose it at different rates, but we're using the plant as our meter to tell us what happened in that soil. And so, just in the same field, 2 different spots with different soil types can lose very different amounts of nitrogen, and you're going to see that in the color of the corn. I do another thing at my university website called Nitrogen Watch, and it's based on rainfall maps, and one of them was shown during the video. And there are separate nitrogen watch maps for well-drained soils and for poorly drained soils because of the difference in how the nitrogen's lost. But I try not to get too technical with that, but it is true that different things happen depending on the soil properties.
Okay, great. Thanks. I'm going to check the YouTube and the email again. So who do we call when we need support? That's one of the questions that I have also. Like, who does a grower call when they need support with this?
Me. So the number on the NVision Ag contact page is my number. I do have a new partner coming in who has a retail business in Western Illinois, and we're going to get his phone number on there as well. But we do not have a support team yet, but so far I've been able to handle it all.
Okay.
And one good thing about that is if anyone knows the answer, it's me.
Right. They can go straight to the top. Okay, good. I don't see any more questions. I'll check the email one more time. Thank you very much for being here with us today and for doing the live Q&A with us at the end of your talk. It was an excellent presentation. At this point, I'll just thank all of our participants who tuned in today for joining our session. If you didn't get a chance to ask your question or you think of something later that you wanted to ask, you can follow up with your Liqui-Grow sales rep. You can contact Dr. Scharf at NVision Ag. You can also always email us at questions@liqui-grow.com. In addition, all of the Lead Academy sessions can be found on our website or by searching Liqui-Grow on YouTube. We will continue to add programming throughout the growing and harvest seasons. So please watch for our event schedules, and also make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel for all content and updated programming. That is the best way to access. If you are a subscriber, the programming will pop up the minute you get on YouTube when there's a new webinar option. Thanks again for joining us. Thank you to our presenters today. Have a great week, and we will see you next time.